"I'm the owner," she said, not loud, not boastful, just clear, calm and devastating. The women froze, the ones who hadn't invited her. The ones who planned the most exclusive high school reunion, only to realize the very estate they desperately needed, belonged to the one they dismissed. And the way she said it? With the ease of someone who didn't need to prove anything, no designer bag flash, no dramatic reveal. Just presence, quiet power. But here's the question. What happens when exclusion meets elevation? When the woman they thought they left behind, owns everything they need? And how did she go from overlooked teenager to the wife of a billionaire, with the keys to a $3 million estate they couldn't access without her? Where are you watching from? California, New York, Atlanta, Texas? Ask yourself this: have you ever been underestimated? Ignored? Uninvited, only to come back stronger? Because this isn't just a story about revenge. This is a story about transformation. About poetic justice. And about a woman who didn't need a second chance, because she built her own door. There's a twist coming. A secret no one saw coming, not even her husband. And by the time this story ends, you'll never look at quiet success the same way again. So if you're ready, tap like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us until the very end. Because what happened next will leave you speechless. She didn't arrive in a black car with tinted windows. There was no entourage. No gloved valet opening her door. Just the slow screech of tires as her gray sedan turned up the long, tree-lined driveway. The car was modest, rental plates, dust on the rims, not even waxed. But she stepped out like she owned the place. In a way, she did. The estate ahead of her wasn't just a house. It was a legacy: white columns, wide steps, and ocean air that hit you the moment you passed the hedges. The kind of place that gets its own zip code. Every window glowing, every glass inside raised in toast. But out here, at the edge of the driveway, she stood alone. No one inside knew her name. Or so they claimed. Her heels sank slightly into the gravel. She took a step forward and paused. From where she stood, she could see silhouettes moving behind the frosted glass. Laughter. Crystal glasses clinking. The kind of celebration that assumes everyone who matters is already present. She adjusted her coat, took a breath, and waited. No one greeted her. No one noticed her. At the entrance, a tall man in a tailored suit stood next to a clipboard. He wasn't security. He was something more dangerous, an event producer. The kind of person whose job was to know exactly who belonged. She approached him slowly. He looked up, past her, then back at the list. His eyes did not widen. He didn't even flinch. She gave her name. He scanned the list. Once. Then again. He didn't ask her to spell it. He simply said, politely, and without emotion, "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the list." She didn't argue. She didn't show surprise. She just stared past him, through the doors, at the room inside. At the people. The guests. The dealmakers. The dreamers. The liars. From behind the glass, no one could see the look in her eyes. Not sadness. Not rage. Something quieter. More dangerous. It was the look of someone who'd seen the game played 1,000 times before. And had finally decided not to watch from the sidelines. She turned back toward the gravel, just slightly. Enough to signal she wouldn't make a scene. But not enough to walk away. And behind her, the man with the list already moved on. Already forgot her name. Maybe he never heard it at all. A valet returned from the guest parking area. "Is this your car, ma'am?" She nodded. He reached for the keys. She hesitated. Held them just long enough to remind herself she still had a choice. Then she dropped them in his palm without a word. He jogged off. She walked toward the edge of the estate lawn, not toward the entrance, but along the perimeter. Her heels now silent on the trimmed grass. She stopped by a hedge overlooking the cliffs. Down below, waves crashed in rhythmic indifference. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, then shifted toward the upper balcony. Up there, framed in amber light, a man leaned over the railing, drink in hand. For a second, he looked directly at her. She looked back. No wave. No smile. Just a pause. Then he turned away, back to the party, and to the people who knew him as Elijah Ransom, owner of Riverview Estate. They didn't know what she knew. Not yet. She wasn't invited. But the land beneath their feet, the deed in the county registry, the history in those bricks, none of it existed without her signature. She was the ghost in their celebration. The question no one had asked. The fact that couldn't stay hidden forever. The Riverview Estate wasn't just real estate. It was real power. Set on 6.3 acres of coastal bluff, flanked by windswept elms and manicured hedges, it offered more than a view. It offered prestige. Its white facade gleamed like a monument, not to history, but to status. The kind of place whispered about at private dinners. The kind of address people said with a pause, letting the name do the talking. To those gathered inside that night, the estate was the centerpiece of an unspoken auction. Developers stood beside architects. Real estate brokers eyed municipal planners. Even a few city officials, dressed down to look off-duty, traced property lines in their heads. Everyone was here for one thing, to get a piece of something that looked unbuyable. The estate had been off-market for years. Quiet. Dormant. Inherited, technically, but forgotten legally. Or so they thought. But someone had done the paperwork. Someone had filed a quiet title claim. Someone had fixed the tax issues, the zoning oddities, the probate confusion. And tonight, rumors said, that someone was ready to sell. Inside the great room, jazz floated in the background, soft and non-threatening, like the tension in the air. Everyone smiled too wide. Laughed too quickly. Toasts were short. Eyes darted to phones, watching for news of the owner's arrival. But the owner had already arrived. Just not the one they were expecting. The assumed seller. The man whose name danced through conversations like a secret everyone knew, was Elijah Ransom. Tech magnate turned reclusive investor. Little was known about him in recent years, except that he had been quietly buying land in the Northeast. The Riverview property was his crown jewel. A relic of his father's side. Black Southern roots planted in Long Island soil. But no one spoke about that. On paper, Elijah owned the land. But paper, like appearances, could be misleading. In the right light, all documents look official. And in the right rooms, all truths look negotiable. That night, no one questioned the absence of a formal pitch. No slideshow. No sales packet. No announcement. Just whispers. Hints. A curated gathering of select stakeholders. As if the deal had already happened and the party was a formality. By the fireplace, two men murmured about square footage. 8,200, not including the wine cellar, one said. Another noted the West Wing could be rezoned as short-term luxury rentals. A woman in a silk blazer pulled up an app and gestured to a $13 million property in East Hampton. This place could double with the right branding. They all thought they were the ones about to make history. What they didn't know, what no one had told them, was that the deed had been quietly altered 3 years ago. Filed not under Elijah's name alone, but with a second signatory. A woman whose name they didn't recognize. A name missing from tonight's list. To them, the estate was a prize. A trophy. A story they could later tell. I almost got that place in Sag Harbor, but you know how those things go. But for one woman, standing quietly just beyond the glow of the lanterns. It was never about the view. It was about being written out of her own story. They all wanted the estate. But none of them knew the truth about who it already belonged to. And soon, every smile in that room would start to fade. The velvet sign at the entrance listed names in gold lettering: governors, financiers, philanthropists. Each name carried weight. But as the camera panned down, the last few lines fell into obscurity, edges left unlit, scribbled in cursive that looked unfamiliar. They said it was the guest list. But it was more, a statement. Who was worth the investment, who belonged in the inner circle? Who mattered? And whose name was missing? Jade Ransom. She watched from the periphery. A name that should have been there. A name that carried law degrees, trust documents, signatures, yet wasn't printed beside the candlelight and champagne flutes. Inside, Elijah's name shone at the top: Elijah Ransom, owner, Riverview Estate. That was enough to set the room's tone. Ownership. Power. Authority. All anchored in a single name. But power is always two-sided. She recalled the first time she saw that list, backstage, in a folder Elijah left behind. She looked at names she didn't know, then found his. But hers? It should have been printed, stamped, at the top as co-owner. Instead, it was hidden. A guest approached from inside, stepping onto the lawn. A smile. A nod. He asked, gently, "Are you here for the estate?" She paused. "I am," she said. He nodded again and continued inside. He didn't ask her name. That night, the estate seemed to speak. The walls whispered, "You belong." But the guest list made them lie. And the music, the laughter, all took place above a secret they didn't yet know was being kept. She leaned on a stone bench under an elm. She closed her eyes. Felt the wind. Felt the history. The kind that came with deeds, not dress codes. The kind that took root long before this invitation, or lack of one, was ever drafted. She opened her eyes. The list, still taped to the board, names she'd never heard. But one she should have known, her own, left unwritten. Tonight, it wasn't just about belonging. It was about recognition. She was born Jade Patterson. Newark, New Jersey. Her mother worked as a housekeeper for most of her life, moving through the same kinds of homes where tonight's guests toasted with rare wine. Homes where Jade wasn't allowed to sit on the furniture. Just clean under it. Jade learned early what silence meant. Her mother said, "Don't ask too many questions, and you might get invited back." And so, Jade watched. And remembered. Every chandelier, every curt smile. Every time her mother was called by the wrong name, and said nothing. She went to public schools, then tested into a magnet program. She had a gift for language. For seeing the loopholes in arguments. Teachers told her to try debate. But she chose law. Real estate law, to be exact. The kind that decides who gets to stay. And who gets pushed out. Howard University gave her a path. She walked its halls with the weight of generations behind her. And not just her family. She carried every woman like her mother, who was erased from the record but never the room. At 27, she passed the bar. At 30, she joined a firm that handled property litigation in D.C., Maryland, and New York. She was good. Too good, some said. Polished. Unshakable. Until the day she met a man who made her pause. She didn't look like the women Elijah Ransom usually dated. At least, that's what people whispered later. She wasn't in the press. She didn't do brunch at the Carlyle. She read zoning reports for fun. She didn't care who he was at first. She liked the way he listened. Really listened. Not with polite nods, but with questions. Real ones. He didn't look at her resume. He looked at her. So when they started dating, it was private. Not because she was ashamed. But because she liked their world untouched by commentary. She thought privacy was a form of protection. But she'd soon learn, it can also be a weapon. To the people in the estate tonight, she was a stranger. A figure on the edge of the lawn. But to Elijah, she was the one who first told him the estate could be worth millions, if it was handled right. And yet, her name wasn't spoken once inside those walls. The irony? Without her, there wouldn't be an estate to celebrate. Elijah Ransom was not born into wealth. He was born in Jackson, Mississippi, in the kind of house where prayers happened before dinner and after bad dreams. His father, Pastor Ransom, ran a small Baptist church off Highway 80. His mother, teacher, choir leader, disciplinarian, and confidant, kept the house running like a machine. Elijah was quiet. Too quiet, some said. While other kids ran through the fields, he stayed inside, taking apart radios and watching how things worked. At 13, he coded his first tool. At 16, he'd already built a basic AI that corrected grammar for church newsletters. He didn't talk much about Jackson. By the time he was 22, he was in Palo Alto, sleeping on startup floors and raising seed rounds like a veteran. Investors liked his mind. They also liked how little he said. By 29, he'd sold his second company for a sum so large, most of it never had to be disclosed. By 31, he had disappeared from the press entirely. Bought a compound. Stopped giving interviews. No Twitter, no Instagram, just legal paperwork and encrypted servers. He never forgot where he came from. But he also never went back. When reporters asked about his family land, he called it ancestral. He didn't mention the property was still in legal limbo, until Jade fixed that. He told colleagues he avoided relationships. Too distracting. Too dangerous. But then came Jade. She didn't flinch at his silence. She filled in the blanks with patience, not assumptions. She didn't ask for his last name. She asked what he missed most about home. He said, the quiet. She said, then we'll build a life in the quiet. And so they did. Together, they traveled. Privately. They created legal structures few could untangle. Co-owned shell companies. Pooled trusts. Things meant to protect them. But protect from who? Elijah wasn't used to being questioned. But with Jade, it felt like honesty. Until it didn't. It was late summer in Brooklyn. A community fundraiser, half organized, half chaotic, with paper signs curling in the heat. Jade was manning a lemonade stand. Her niece's class was raising money for new supplies. She didn't plan to stay long. Elijah came late. He said he'd been stuck in traffic. No one recognized him. He looked like someone's quiet cousin. No watch. No entourage. He asked for 2 lemonades. Paid with a 20. Told her to keep the change. She teased him. You could have gotten water from the cooler. He replied, I don't like things that pretend to be free. She tilted her head. He smiled. Just slightly. They spoke for 15 minutes. Then 30. When her sister came over to help, Elijah asked if he could stay. You know, he said, I like lemonade. He left with her number written on a napkin. Not because he didn't have a phone. But because he said, paper feels more honest. They didn't text for 2 days. Then he sent one line. I've been thinking about you, and Lemon. Their first real date was at a bookstore. Their second at a property auction. By the third, she knew. Not that he was wealthy. But that he was lonely. Jade had seen ambition. She'd seen charisma. But Elijah had something rarer, restraint. And she was drawn to it. Their love didn't start with fireworks. It started with quiet. With mutual silence. And that silence, at first, felt like intimacy. For a long time, they kept their relationship hidden. Not because it was shameful, but because it felt sacred. A thing untouched by gossip, by commentary, by expectation. Elijah said, "Privacy is the last currency." Jade agreed. They booked separate flights. Used initials on hotel reservations. Told friends they were traveling alone, even when they were together. At restaurants, he never sat facing the window. At events, he showed up alone, then disappeared early. Not once did he post a photo. Not once did he name her aloud. Jade thought it was caution. She thought it was his way of protecting them. "Let them think whatever they want," he said. "We know the truth." And she did. Until she didn't. Because love kept in shadow begins to feel like absence. And soon, the silence between them began to feel like distance. She asked him, once, "Why won't you say my name?" He kissed her forehead and said, "Because they don't deserve to hear it." It sounded romantic. But silence, when repeated enough, starts to echo. And in that echo, she began to wonder, if no one knows you're loved, do you still exist in the relationship? They never married. At least, not in the way most people understand it. There was no ceremony. No vows. No cake. Just documents. Contracts. Clauses. Things written in ink instead of spoken from the heart. Jade had helped draft the trust. It was her idea to co-own assets without traditional titles. "This way, we protect each other," she said. Elijah agreed. They shared a legal entity. R&R Land Holdings. Half hers. Half his. Quietly powerful. Legally complex. On paper, she was listed as managing partner for select parcels of land, including a coastal property in Sag Harbor. She signed. He signed. Their lawyer notarized. No bouquet. No witnesses. Just documents and intent. She told herself, love doesn't need symbols. It needs structure. But as time passed, she noticed the symbols piling up, around him. He wore no ring. Neither did she. But his partners called him a bachelor. His bio said, single. His press releases mentioned no partner. When she asked why, he said, because you're not mine to be named. You're mine to be protected. It sounded kind. Until it wasn't. Because protection, like silence, can become erasure. It came late. Nearly midnight. He was already asleep, shirt half off, laptop open, browser frozen on a spreadsheet. She wasn't trying to snoop. But the screen lit up with a ping, and the subject line caught her eye, Riverview Estate. Preliminary valuation and buyer pool. She moved the mouse. The inbox opened without a password. She froze. 5 recipients. All names she recognized from Elijah's firm, attorneys, asset managers, an old colleague from Stanford. Not one was her. She clicked it open. Inside, a PDF. 23 pages. Detailed renderings of the estate. Development overlays. Profit projections. Not rumors, plans. Contracts in motion. Deals being brokered behind the language of, just thinking ahead. She reread the intro twice, pending internal approval, property will be segmented and rezoned for commercial use. Her name appeared nowhere. Neither did her title. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in bed beside him, eyes open. Listening to the sound of him breathing, steady, rhythmic. Like someone who had nothing to hide. The next morning, she made eggs. Poured coffee. Said nothing. Waited. He didn't mention the email. He didn't even open his laptop. Or maybe, he already had. She asked casually, "Are you still thinking about developing the estate?" He looked up, confused, or pretending. "It's just talk," he said. "People send ideas all the time. We'll handle it internally." There it was again. Internally. A word that meant, not with you. It wasn't the email that changed things. It was the fact that he didn't think she'd see it. That he didn't think she should see it. And suddenly, she realized, she wasn't in the loop. She was on the list. Just not that list. It became his answer for everything. Questions about finances. We'll handle it internally. Zoning shifts. Internally. Joint decisions. Trust me, we've got this. We. Not you. At first, she thought it was habit. The language of boardrooms leaking into breakfast conversations. But it wasn't just tone. It was intent. The more she asked, the quieter he became. "I'm protecting us," he said. "You don't need the noise." But what if the noise was the only way to know the truth? One night, she printed the trust agreement. Spread it across the kitchen table. This clause, about land transfer approvals, who added that? He didn't look. Just sipped his wine and said, "It's legal boilerplate." Then why wasn't I told? Because it changes nothing. But it does, she whispered. It changed everything. He stood. Quiet. Calm. "We'll talk when you've calmed down." And that's when she knew, the conversation was over. Not paused. Not delayed. Over. She packed the papers. Put them in a folder. And hid them. Not because she didn't trust him. But because she had to be sure she wasn't losing herself by degrees. He wasn't cruel. He never raised his voice. Never called her names. But silence, when used well, can be sharper than any insult. He said we. But he meant me. It was a small dinner. 8 people. Industry friends. Casual, but not quite. The kind of evening where deals were seated in compliments. Where laughter softened negotiations. Jade sat 2 seats down from Elijah. They weren't affectionate in public. But tonight, he seemed farther than usual. She heard him say it over dessert, just loud enough to be overheard. "It's just old land. Not that valuable." His voice was casual. Maybe even bored. But her breath caught. He was talking about their land. The estate. The land his grandfather once called our return. The land she'd spent months sorting legal records for. Not valuable. Someone laughed. "Well, let me know if you're offloading. I've got buyers lined up." Elijah smiled, but said nothing. Jade placed her spoon down. Slowly. Her hands were steady. But something inside her tilted. He hadn't looked at her. Not once during the exchange. Not after. She waited. For a glance. For reassurance. Nothing. Later that night, she asked him quietly, "Do you really think the land isn't valuable?" He shrugged. "It's all speculative, Jade. You know that." But she did know. She knew the land was priceless, not for what it could be sold for, but for what had already been promised. And now, those promises were being sold as punchlines. They came in black cars. They dressed like heirs. They spoke with familiarity, handshakes too long, hugs too rehearsed. They called Elijah, cousin. But Jade had never met them before. "These are family," he said once, when she asked. Distant. But close enough. Close enough to be invited. Close enough to take photos in front of her estate. but not close enough to introduce her. She watched one of them wander through the West Wing, phone out, narrating a tour for their followers. "This room will be mine once we close the deal," she heard him say. Another stood on the back patio with an architect. "Could we knock this down for the guest house?" The architect nodded. "Zoning's tight. But with the right language? Anything's possible." She stood by the door. Listening. Invisible. A homeowner without an invite. A partner without a voice. Elijah had said they were just helping. "They're consultants," he said. "They're not decision makers." But decision makers don't always look like they're in charge. They just speak with confidence. And no one stops them. She searched the guest list later that night. None of their names appeared as stakeholders. But all of them were acting like owners. She opened the deed again. Her name was there. Theirs were not. But in rooms like this, paper isn't power. Perception is. It was buried on page 14. A small section labeled Fitness Clause. It read, "If a partner is deemed emotionally or professionally unfit, full asset control transfers to the remaining trustee." She stared at it. Then again. This wasn't standard. Not in any co-trust agreement she'd ever written. She would never sign this. Except, she had. The clause hadn't been there when she reviewed the draft. It was slipped in during the filing stage. After she signed. After the notary. She pulled the filing date. Compared it to her calendar. That week, she had been in Houston. Her flight confirmation proved it. But the papers were signed in New York. By her. Or someone pretending to be. She checked the signature. It looked like hers. But the J was wrong. Too sharp. Too tall. She knew. Instantly. That wasn't her handwriting. She called the attorney who processed it. No answer. Emailed twice. Nothing. Finally, she called his assistant. "The firm no longer represents Mr. Ransom," she said. "Effective last week." That night, Jade sat at the dining table. Clause circled. Timeline mapped. She realized, this wasn't an oversight. It was a rewrite. Not of a document. Of a relationship. It was small. The kind of lie people tell when they think it won't matter. 2012. Tech conference in Lisbon. Elijah told investors he was traveling alone. That he wasn't tied down. Said it in passing, between panels. A joke, almost. No time for romance, he laughed. But Jade had been there. Not as a guest. Not in photos. But in his hotel room, 3 floors above the conference stage. They ate takeout in bathrobes. She reviewed his pitch deck while he edited code. They weren't hiding. Not really. But he never corrected the lie. She remembered watching him laugh with investors the next day. Remembered thinking, maybe he's protecting me from the noise. She told herself it was strategy. Privacy. But later, she asked him. "Why didn't you say you had someone?" He shrugged. "They don't care about that stuff." And then, quieter, "They think it makes you weak." She nodded. Pretended to understand. But something lodged in her chest. The idea that loving her was a liability. That was the first lie. Not because it was malicious. But because it made space for more. The lies that followed weren't about love. They were about access. About money. About ownership. And by the time she realized how much he'd chosen silence over truth. The house was already built. And she was already living inside it. The photo was in a hidden folder. Buried behind financial reports, password logs, and old pitch decks. She found it by accident. Looking for tax receipts. Click. Open. Pause. A woman. On the porch of Riverview Estate. Summer light on her shoulders. Barefoot. Laughing. She was holding a mug. Wearing a robe. Elijah's robe. Jade stared at the timestamp. August 6th. Elijah had told her he was in D.C. that weekend. Testifying before a subcommittee. He even sent her a photo, from a hotel bar, next to a marble column. Now she wondered if that photo had been staged. The woman in the picture wasn't famous. No tags. No name. Just, comfortable. Too comfortable. Jade saved the image. Didn't say a word. That night, she sat across from Elijah at dinner. He asked how her day had been. She said, quiet. He smiled. Good. You like quiet. She nodded. But inside, the noise was deafening. She didn't ask who the woman was. Because deep down, she already knew. The photo didn't prove betrayal. But it confirmed something else, that Elijah had a life outside her. And that life included the estate. And if he had taken someone else there? What else had he shared? He said it after every new deal. After every property. Every LLC. Every shell company. This is all for us. It became a mantra. A lullaby. A shield. When she questioned a blind transfer, he said, "You'll thank me later." When she pointed out missing paperwork, "It's just noise. The structure's clean." She wanted to believe him. And at first, she did. Because the world outside them was built on paperwork and illusion. Maybe they were just playing the game better. But the more he said, "us," the less it felt like truth. And the more it sounded like possession. One night, they were reviewing documents for a deal in Martha's Vineyard. She flagged a clause. "This gives you veto power over any sale." He smiled. "Exactly. That way no one gets taken advantage of." She closed the folder. Looked at him. "Is this for us, Elijah? Or for you?" He didn't answer. Just reached for her hand. Held it gently. Too gently. And in that moment, she realized, when someone insists everything is for us, it's usually because they already decided what you deserve. Charmaine Ransom. Elijah's younger sister. 2 years apart. Tighter than siblings usually are. Until she vanished. Jade had asked about her once. He said she'd moved out west. Didn't like the spotlight. Private life, he said. Like it was a diagnosis. There were no photos of her. No phone calls. No holidays. But then, at the estate, during the investor preview, her name showed up on a clipboard. Charmaine R. Architectural consultant. Jade stared at it. Asked a planner nearby, "Did you meet her?" He nodded. Briefly. "She's sharp. Very protective." Jade didn't show her shock. Just smiled. But her stomach turned. Because if Charmaine had been involved, that meant Elijah had been lying. Not just about property. But about family. And if he could hide a sister for years, what else had he hidden? She'd looked at her signature 1,000 times. Jade L. Ransom. Strong L. Wide R. Always the same. But on this document, the R was crooked. The L looped high, like a child's. She held it to the light. Ran her finger across the ink. It was smooth. Fresh. Too fresh. She checked the timestamp. Digital signing platform. No IP address listed. Just a username, JRAN032. She never used that tag. Not once. She called the registry office. Requested the original. A clerk hesitated. Then admitted, the paper copy never arrived. We just logged the digital file. That file was faked. She called Elijah. Didn't yell. Didn't accuse. Just said. Someone forged my signature. He paused. Then said, that's impossible. She waited. But he never followed up. And just like that, she knew. It was just after dusk when the lights flickered. Not the house lights, those stayed steady. It was the lawn. The floodlights that usually lit the east side of the estate. First a pulse, then darkness. Jade noticed it immediately. She had been walking the perimeter alone, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater, the wind biting along her collarbone. It had become a habit lately, to walk the grounds after most guests left, when the estate returned to stillness. She needed the silence. The air. The time to think. She paused when the floodlights blinked. Waited. Nothing. The edge of the property sank into shadow. The trees swayed harder, their outlines now just jagged sketches against the night. Her breath slowed. Inside, the house was still alive, voices echoing through the windowpanes, laughter drifting from the parlor. No one inside had noticed the darkness out here. It wasn't enough to cause concern. Just enough to send a message. Or maybe that's just what it felt like. She walked to the edge where the light had once touched the grass. It was colder here, exposed to the sea breeze. The house was now behind her. Her world, the world she had helped build. Sitting just beyond her reach, glowing, full of people who didn't know she was part of it. She crouched beside the breaker box near the hedge. The metal was slightly worn. Recently accessed. She reached for it, paused. A shadow moved near the edge of the trees. Just one. A quick flicker of movement, gone before she could name it. She stood quickly. Turned. No one was there. She wasn't scared. Not exactly. She was used to shadows. She had lived in one for years. When she returned to the house, Elijah was in the library, a drink in hand, feet crossed. He looked up when she entered. She waited. Waited for him to ask where she'd been, if she was cold, if she needed anything. But he only said, the guests are staying late tonight. She nodded. The lights on the east lawn are out. He didn't even blink. Probably just a short. Maintenance will handle it. But she knew. Elijah always checked the systems himself. That was his obsession. Every wire, every fuse, every camera. She walked past him, sat in the chair across the room, and opened a book she couldn't read. The room was silent, save for the ticking of the brass clock above the mantel. Time, moving forward, as if nothing had happened. But something had. She just didn't know what yet. The voicemail came at 2:11 a.m. She didn't hear the phone buzz until morning, when sunlight had already poured across the kitchen counters. The house was quiet, Elijah had left early. Another meeting. Another walk-through. She sat on the edge of the breakfast bench, legs tucked beneath her, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. When she finally checked her messages, the notification blinked once. Just one missed call. Unknown caller. One new voicemail. She almost deleted it. But instinct made her press play. It was a woman's voice. Low. Measured. With that southern lilt that always curled the end of words like a question, even when it wasn't one. You don't know me. But I knew your mother. And I know what they're doing to you. The voice paused. They left me out too. I thought it was love. It wasn't. Jade froze. Her hand trembled. The voice was unfamiliar, but the pain was not. It was laced with something Jade couldn't describe. Not warning. Not threat. More like kinship. Someone who had already walked the path Jade was only now seeing. The message continued. He thinks you won't check the 2019 filings. He thinks you trust him enough not to look that far back. But it's there. The addendum. It changed everything. There was no name. No callback number. Just that calm, almost sorrowful voice. You have more power than they think. But only if you act before the sale closes. Click. End of message. Jade replayed it 3 times. Memorized the rhythm. Closed her eyes and tried to match the voice to a face. Her mother had passed 6 years ago. Never spoke of old friends. Never warned her. Why now? And more importantly, what exactly had Elijah changed in 2019? The drawer had always been locked. It sat in the center of Elijah's desk, carved from mahogany, handles so smooth they shone like glass. Most drawers opened easily. Bills. Pens. Tech. But the center? Always locked. Always untouched. She had asked once, years ago. What's in there? He had smiled. Nothing important. But she knew Elijah never kept nothing. He was precise. He believed in backups. Hard copies. Originals. No cloud. No trust in systems he didn't build himself. So whatever was in that drawer, he believed it needed to be kept close. She waited until he left for a speaking engagement in Boston. She had 4 hours. Enough time to make tea, rehearse her story, and find the spare key. It wasn't in the usual places. Not in his safe. Not behind the books. But when she opened the second drawer, beneath the insurance files, there it was. A small black key. Almost dull. Almost overlooked. Her hand shook slightly as she inserted it into the lock. It clicked softly. She pulled the drawer open. Inside, envelopes. A dozen or more. Each with a name. A date. Some she recognized, former business partners, one of his old mentors. But one envelope had no name. Just the words, emergency instructions. She opened it. Inside, a notarized statement. Elijah's signature at the bottom. And a clause. Should Jade Patterson become incapacitated or absent for more than 30 days, all properties under shared trust revert to sole management under Ransom Holdings. She stared at it. This wasn't a will. It was a plan. Elijah prided himself on security. Cameras on every entrance. Motion lights. Biometric locks. He said it made the estate safe. He never said safe for who. Jade rarely checked the feeds. But one afternoon, as she sat reviewing her call logs, something caught her eye. A glitch. Just a flicker. The east hallway feed froze for 6 seconds, then resumed. Normal to anyone else. But she had lived here long enough to know, the system didn't freeze. She rewound the tape. Paused at the exact frame. A figure. Not Elijah. Not staff. A woman. Slim. Mid-30s. Walking out of the study. Carrying a folder. She enlarged the image. Grainy. Unclear. But the outline was familiar. Too familiar. Jade's throat tightened. It wasn't the woman from the photo. It was someone else. And the folder she carried was navy blue, with a seal on the front, Ransom and Co. Legal. Jade checked the calendar. Elijah hadn't been home that day. So who had let this woman in? And what had she taken? She sent a snapshot of the frame to a friend in cybersecurity. No metadata. Timestamp was real. No signs of hacking. So the system didn't fail. It was altered. On purpose. Jade sat back. Closed the feed. Her chest tightened, not with fear. With clarity. Someone was coming through the front door. And she wasn't the only one being erased. They stopped speaking for 3 days. Not out of anger. But because neither knew what truth would come out if they opened their mouths. They still shared the same house. The same bed. The same routine. But everything felt misaligned. The towels folded slightly different. The pantry reorganized. Elijah had stopped using her favorite mug. The silence wasn't loud. It was surgical. No fighting. Just avoidance. The kind that leaves no bruises. But still breaks things. Jade left early each morning. Drove to town. Pretended to run errands. She sat in her car in the bookstore parking lot, reviewing documents, watching people walk by. She envied their simplicity. He texted once, "We should talk." She didn't respond. Not because she didn't want to. But because she didn't know where to start. What part of her was still intact enough to speak for? She remembered something her mother once said, years ago. You can love someone and still need to protect yourself from them. She hadn't understood it then. She did now. The estate loomed behind them. Beautiful. Expansive. But at its center was a crack. Not in the foundation. In the silence between them. It was a single room above a bakery in the city. Tucked between law offices and design firms, with no signage. Just a keypad lock. Elijah called it a workspace, a secondary office. Nothing important. But Jade had followed the trail. Quietly. A friend at the county registrar tipped her off. The lease was in a shell company's name. One that tied back to Ransom Holdings, but listed Elijah as the sole managing partner. The receptionist was gone for the day. The hallway echoed as she entered. She had the code. She had always had the code, she just didn't know she had a reason to use it. The room was cold. Unfurnished except for a table, a locked file cabinet, and a worn leather chair. On the wall, a blueprint. Riverview. Divided into 6 parcels. Labeled. Valued. Her name wasn't on any of them. She opened the drawers. Letters. Contracts. Plans dated months before they discussed selling anything. Not one mention of her approval. But one page stopped her cold. Final buyout proposal, buyer interested in full removal of partner if non-compliant. She folded it. Slipped it into her coat. Walked out. And in that moment, something shifted, not in fear, but in resolve. He had tried to erase her. But she was still here. She made the appointment herself. No attorneys. No assistants. Just her. A quiet room. 2 bankers. And a copy of the original trust deed, her copy. She slid the file across the table. Pointed to the signature clause. This document has been altered, she said. And I can prove it. They reviewed the timestamps. The metadata. She laid out her evidence piece by piece, photographs, statements from notaries, side-by-side signature comparisons. One banker cleared his throat. You understand what this means, Ms. Patterson? She nodded. I do. It could trigger legal review. For every transaction he's made. I know, she said. I want that. Do you want to freeze the account? Yes, she replied. Immediately. She walked out of the bank not with a sense of revenge, but with a calm she hadn't felt in months. The estate wasn't a prize anymore. It was a battlefield. And she had finally stopped waiting for someone to fight for her. Now, she was fighting for herself. She didn't plan it. But he came home early that night. Saw her on the porch. Knew something had changed. "Why didn't you just ask?" she said. He stood still. Not defensive. Not apologetic. Just tired. "Because you would have said no." "I had the right to say no," she replied. He nodded. Looked past her, toward the horizon. The estate behind them glowing under floodlights. Their legacy, built on silence. "Do you want to destroy me?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "I want to remember who I was before you convinced me I was only valuable when silent." They sat on the steps in silence. For once, there was no performance. No defense. Just two people looking at the house they had built, and all that had been lost inside it. He said, "I loved you the only way I knew how." She shook her head. "Then maybe you never really knew me." Riverview didn't go to auction. Not yet. Legal proceedings were still pending. The subdivision was paused. The buyers had pulled out, uncertain because the woman they had overlooked was now the one calling the shots. Jade didn't reclaim the estate out of spite. She did it to protect what had always mattered, the promise, the heritage, the land passed down through a line of people who had never been invited into rooms like this. The estate remained in limbo. Legally intact. Emotionally scarred. But she walked it now with a different posture. Not as the wife. Not as the partner. As the owner. She started archiving stories. Inviting the elders of Elijah's family. Her own. She recorded their voices. Their memories. She put them in the rooms they were once denied entry to. Because the land was never just about money. It was about presence. And now, she was fully present. What makes a person disappear without ever leaving? Is it when they stop speaking? Or when no one listens? Can love survive ambition? Can trust survive strategy? What do we owe to the people who build beside us, when they quietly draft blueprints for our absence? There are no villains here. Just choices. Some made in fear. Some in power. All irreversible. And what of Elijah? He didn't lose the estate. He lost something far quieter. The right to Jade's silence. She still lives there. The papers are still pending. The house is still standing. But now, when people walk through the estate, they know her name. Because she put it on every wall, every document, every deed. And when they ask who owns Riverview, she says nothing. She just smiles. Because they already know.